And welcome back, everyone. Nice to have you with us on this lovely Wednesday right here. I personally, if I gotta be honest with you all, I do not feel like doing this. I don't know what's overcome me as someone who loves college football and loves talking about these things, but for whatever reason, I just am not in the mood to do this. But we're going to go through it. We're going to do it. I have a few questions I want to answer from all of you. I have some Ohio State, Michigan recruiting updates that I want to talk about here tonight. And then I'll answer any of your questions at the end of the video, given that you provide a super chat. So that's what tonight's going to be. It's like a usual Withdrawal Wednesday. I only have 3 questions, though, this time that I'm answering because I wanted to get some recruiting updates in today, just for a variety of reasons. Didn't have the time to do that in outside of the live show. I wanted to make some videos beforehand, but again, just didn't have the time. So here we are, and we're going to be talking about some defensive line commits that Ohio State and Michigan got, which are huge. Both, I would say, for the health and future of their program, need great defensive linemen in my mind. And I think that Michigan they have 4 or 5 senior defensive tackles, which is crazy. I mean, it's just crazy. Ohio State, a defensive tackle for this season, doesn't quite have that same seniority, and they have some more depth concerns than Michigan does. But they could hypothetically, I think, bring all of their 2-deep defensive tackles back if they wanted, which is really good. It's a blessing, and that's going to especially be the case if one of their 2-deep players can pan out there. That would be really good. But for Michigan, they have 4, even 5 senior defensive tackles, and that's a luxury to have. But you also have to face the consequences of that luxury, which is you have to replace all of those guys after they leave. And none of them are going to redshirt barring injury. We don't have 6 seasons of eligibility anymore. So it's huge that Michigan has the 2 defensive line recruits they have that they earned over the past several days. Then for Ohio State, they already had an elite recruiting class. I think this class has the chance to be the best easily in terms of quality in America. Currently it is only behind Alabama, who has 6 commits and has an average recruit rank of 94.03 per 24/7 Sports composite. Oregon is close with a 92.82, and Georgia is close as well with a 92, Notre Dame with a 92.35, but Ohio State is a 92.96 average rank per recruit, which as it stands right now is number 2 nationally, and they have 15 commits to, again, Alabama's 6. So they're rolling, and with where they are in recruiting and with the players, high school players, they are in contention with to bring them in as enrollees and future Buckeyes, this could be the number 1 recruiting class of 2026. So we'll talk about that. Michigan finally got into the 30s. It took a while, but they finally got into the 30s, and it seems like they have a lot of momentum on the recruiting trail. I also want to talk about whether you should buy into Michigan State football, more specifically why you should. Kind of another video talking about the athletic director, but more so tying it in to my thoughts on Michigan State football. And then I also want to discuss Oregon's defensive line, and there's another question about Michigan that an Ohio State fan actually posed to me. So we'll get to that. Make sure everyone to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. All of those things are totally free, doesn't sign you up for anything. And also join our Discord server, which again, totally free. Links in the description. Just click that, navigate to the hashtag YouTube mailbox section, and ask me a question. So that way your question can be featured and made into a video on Withdrawal Wednesdays. Anyway, just had to itch my nose there. It was quite itchy, as a matter of the fact. Let's get into it. And I think there's no better place to start than Michigan earning a pair of defensive line commits, and also talking about what 24/7 Sports and others think of their current recruiting class board. Don't think there's any better place to start because Michigan recruiting has been dead for quite some time. Very reminiscent of last cycle, where it started off pretty slow and then finished strong. And then the cycle before that, Harbaugh's really his last recruiting cycle, the 2024 class, at one point it was the best class in the nation, but then they lost some momentum, and in the fall, I actually think they lost more players than they gained, which was quite sad. They finished outside of the top 10. Got a bunch of earlier commits, not a ton of highly ranked guys. Turned out that Jaden Davis wasn't quite the 5-star some people thought he was initially. Probably won't play all that much at Michigan, sadly, but it is what it is. It looks like this class, with all the 5-stars and high-level 4-stars that are on the board, has a chance to really finish out, much like last year's class for Michigan. So let's get into it here. Michigan earned a pair of defensive line commitments this week. Both 4-stars, both I think of good size, of good stature. One out of Texas, another out of Illinois. Michigan, like last season, getting a great defensive lineman out of Illinois, and then going into Texas and getting a player in Alistair Vallejo, I hope that's how you say his name, who Notre Dame really, really wanted, 6'3", 310 pounds. He committed yesterday, Tuesday, June 10th, and Mikhail Blade committed June 9th on a Monday. It seems like Michigan is putting together a recruiting class that I would call for now solid, and based on their board, I think it's a class that can be really good, that can be top 10 again, that if they play their cards right and pay out a lot of money and have success this season, again, playing all their cards right, which typically doesn't happen. Typically teams, even ones that win the Natty, don't play all their cards correctly, or at least all the balls don't bounce in their direction. Think of the last 2 national championship winners, or even the last 3 or 4. Ohio State had a lot of injuries along the O-line that hampered it, and their corners didn't pan out the way that you thought they were going to after 2023. Michigan in 2023, tackle didn't pan out the way they wanted to until the playoffs, and then their wide receiver core probably wasn't as good as one might have hoped it to be that year. I thought that Roman Wilson could have been a 1,000-yard receiver, but alas, didn't happen. In Georgia, back in 2022, and I could go on and on and on, their pass defense and their defense overall is not up to standard from their perspective with all the talent they had. And then Georgia in 2021, well, they got destroyed by Alabama, and that was because despite all the talent that defense had, it had some exploitable weaknesses, and Stetson Bennett wasn't the perfect quarterback talent either. But all of those teams were elite. They all won a bunch of games. They all won the national title, which was the most important. If Michigan can just have most of the balls bounce their way or play most of their cards correctly, or even just some of them, this recruiting class can be quite impressive. Before we get to that, though, I do want to dive into these 2 defensive line commits a little bit more specifically, and I also ask, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, hit the notification bell so that you can get notified when we give you more content about Michigan football, and also hit the notification bell for the Michigan football podcast that we have on here, which is just a playlist for you to follow if you really care about my Michigan football content but don't care about many other teams. It's just an opportunity for you to catch up with my Michigan news. So hit the notification bell for that in the description. And also check out any other links we have in the description. We have a Discord server that's free, Patreon page for some paid members, and also a merchandise store where you can purchase merchandise that's really comfortable and nice to wear. Should probably wear it on the show more often. But anyway, who cares? This recruiting class is ranked 32nd, 6 4-stars, 3 3-stars per composite. Also has an average player rank of a 90.43. Let's start off with the first defensive line commit, Mikhail Blade. At the edge position, 6'4", 245 pounds. That's some nice height, nice weight for a defensive end. Simeon High School, or maybe it's Simon, I don't know. Chicago, Illinois. 210th nationally per 24/7 Sports and per the composite, 168th nationally. Top 6 player, regardless of who you look at, in all of Illinois. Recruited by Lou Esposito, and he committed after his visit on June 6th. So the visit went rather well. When you look at his tape, guy's physical, impressive. He's everything I think that you want in a edge player. That's why he's ranked as a middle-of-the-road, even higher caliber 4-star. And Michigan was able to get good players out of Illinois last season. Nathaniel Marshall, he was from Illinois. So it's nice to kind of get that pipeline going, continue to utilize that. And Michigan, contrary to popular belief, when you look at the amount of 4 and 5 stars in the defensive line, they're not plentiful. Like Kenneth Grant was a 3-star. Mason Graham was a mid to high level 4-star. And when you look at Michigan's current offensive line, not all of them, not even the vast majority of them, are blue chip players. And the standard should be higher than that. Just having a low level 4-star and a bunch of 3-stars shouldn't be good enough. Now, Michigan's development has been good, both in the Harbaugh era and I would even say the Moore era on the D line. One of the only areas that I don't think Michigan took a massive hit at in terms of positional development after Harbaugh's entire staff left was defensive line. They actually made it a great, impressive hire there in Lou Esposito, who I think is more proven than any other position coach on the defense, and most, if not all of them, on offense. Just my personal opinion. And I think a lot of the stuff he did at Western Michigan backs up that evidence. Michigan's defensive line is well situated, but all of their starters, minus Trey Pierce, so TJ Guy, Derek Moore, Rayshon Benny, 3 to 4 defensive linemen are gone after this year, starting. And then you look at the 2 deep, Cameron Brandt, Jr., Trey Williams, graduate, Damon Payne, graduate. So 3 of your 4 defensive tackles gone. And who knows, maybe I don't imagine more than 2 of Michigan's 2 deep at D end leave, but both of their starting defensive ends are gone. Don't have any more eligibility barring injury. TJ Guy and Derek Moore. So they need to recruit well on the D line. It's refreshing to see them doing that if you're a Michigan fan. Again, 6'4", 245 pounds, out of Illinois, physical at the point of attack, fast. Certainly looks like he knows how to use his body and is aware, has high situational awareness. So all good things you want to see. Alistair Vallejo out of Texas, Liberty Hill, Texas, 204 ranked player per 24/7 Sports and 410th nationally per the composite. So 24/7 Sports is higher on him than a lot of other services are. He was going to either commit to Notre Dame, Kansas, or Michigan. Decided to commit to Michigan ahead of his planned visit on June 13th. Michigan flipped him essentially from Notre Dame, which is where he was heavily trending. He's had 18 sacks, 18 sacks over the past 2 seasons, which is crazy. 18 sacks, 21 TFLs, very productive player, 6'3", 310 pounds at the D line. So he's not undersized. You're not going to have to bring him in and get him up in terms of total body weight. Now, probably have to put on some muscle, obviously a freshman, and most freshmen don't come in and immediately start, let alone contribute. But he's a good addition, given the fact that, again, you look at Michigan's depth chart, and whether it's Ike Iwuna, Damon Payne, Trey Williams, Rayshon Benny, there are 4 players from that defensive line who are gone after this year. And I think all of them are good college players. Some of them have the potential to be elite, I think, like Rayshon Benny. So there's going to be a lot of room in that D-line, and you're going to need to continue to stack talent there. Probably need to use the portal as well after this season. If you hear any meows, that's my cat saying hello, just for context. So great additions on the defensive line, as we already talked about. And Vallejo is powerful up the middle. Excellent pass rusher, great pursuit. He's huge, notable, energetic. I'm just seeing film of him right now block an extra point on his own. Huge get for Michigan and Lou Esposito in my mind. Now you look at their board, and we'll talk about this briefly because I think at this point it's very hard to assess where players are going to go. But Felix Ojo from Lake Ridge, Mansfield, Texas, offensive tackle, 5th overall player per 24/7 Sports. After his visit to Michigan, he said that they're in contention with Texas and Ohio State, and he canceled his Oklahoma visit. So I think that's good news. The fact that he's contending with Ohio State and Texas, who usually are almost always going to recruit better than Michigan, unless Michigan is better than them over a timeline of years, or they're paying way more. The former's unlikely. The latter is also unlikely because Texas and Ohio State are operating at a machine level right now. That's impressive. And then Darius Gray is someone that 24/7 Sports lists as warm for Michigan. Same with Savion Hyder, running back. Gray is an offensive tackle from Richmond, Virginia. Trenton Henderson, edge from Florida, is viewed as warm for Michigan. And then Carter Meadows, another edge, warm from Washington, D.C. Kari Adams is in the picture. And then there's many other players, higher level 4-stars, top 100 players that Michigan seemingly could get. And then Brady Smigiel from Newberry Park from California. Per the composite, he's a top 100 player and a top 10 quarterback in this class, which is good. So I think Michigan recruiting is set up to succeed once again this year. I just think for whatever reason under Sharon Moore and his staff, they start off slower but finish stronger, similar to what Texas does now, what Alabama did under Saban, and I think what they still do now, as opposed to Ohio State, who typically, starts strong, finishes strong. For example, Michigan used to start strong or start okay and then finish okay in both instances under Harbaugh, especially the later years. So Michigan recruiting, I think, is ultimately on the right track. That's what you want to see, especially since in the past few seasons outside of last year's 2025 recruiting class, Michigan recruiting kind of fell off a little bit. So it's good to see that momentum's being picked back up. You just wonder how sustainable this is and if they can sustain it, because nothing's guaranteed. But I'd say more likely than not, Michigan finishes with a top 10 recruiting class, pending on how the season does, whether they go over, under their win total, how they look in their games, etc. So something's in my eye. I don't know what is in my eye, but that was incredibly annoying. But now we can get to talking about Ohio State recruiting. I just want to see what the chat is saying before we get any further. Oh, wow, got a lot of concurrent viewers. That's pretty good. Make sure, if you haven't already, to like the stream and subscribe, guys. It's free. It's easy. Joe says hello from Dayton, Ohio. That's pretty awesome. Seems like we have a lot of Ohio State fans in here. Marcus Sutton, Washington fan. So I'll say a go Huskies for you. He says, I hope all is well. All is well on the end. Again, as I mentioned earlier, I don't feel like doing this, but I'm doing it because it's my primary job. It's something that I enjoy. So we're doing it. And we'll finish out. And what I want to talk about next is Ohio State recruiting, which I've been very impressed by. I think that this class has the chance to be a 2021 level class for Ohio State. So I'm going to talk about it. I mean, they earned an edge commit, and a good edge commit, a 4-star who can definitely rise after this season and perform at a pretty high level. So I'm actually quite excited to talk about this one. It was a win for Matt Patricia on the recruiting trail, who I think was the primary recruiter for Kari Wilder. And man, isn't Kari Wilder wild? The film will tell you that. So Ohio State earned a commitment from Kari Wilder, edge player, high-level, mid-level 4-star, player who I think is potentially freakishly athletic, 6'4", 260 pounds. He's from California. Ohio State right now in their 2026 recruiting class has 3 players from California. You have Chris Henry Jr., Caden Dixon-Wyatt, so 2 players from modern day, wide receivers, both of them. It's the Brian Hartline experience. You ace your wide receivers, not just in recruiting, but in evaluation. I swear he might be one of the better position coaches, if not potentially the best position coach of the 21st century. Certainly up there all time as well. And I think after this season, when Carnell Tate gets drafted in the first round, I think that his legendary status will be further solidified. But we're not talking about wide receiver. I just brought them up because it's significant, this Kari Wilder commit is, because he's also from California. And USC has recently done a pretty good job of putting up more of a fence around California. Oregon's recruited well in California recently. And while California isn't as dominant in talent as it used to be, it still produces a lot of talent. And it's good to see that Ohio State is recruiting still at a national level on the defensive line. Their defensive line recruiting is, I would think, fallen off recently. And this commitment from Wilder certainly doesn't get them back to the standard they need to. But Matt Patricia was involved in this recruitment, and it paid off. I think that Matt Patricia, and this is coming from someone who views Matt Patricia as certainly a risky hire at defensive coordinator. A lot of reasons for optimism, but we'll see how it pans out. He has benefited Ohio State tremendously in recruiting. Tremendously. He's better than Jim Knowles there, for sure. And I think that Wilder, when you look at his film, he's violent. He's big for an edge player. Certainly weight and being undersized or anything like that won't be a problem. And he's fast, too. Very twitchy. Definitely someone who can level up as time goes on. A lot of potential there. And I think a great addition to this Ohio State recruiting class, where you look at it, 15 hard commits. A great majority of them, including Wilder, have shut down their commitment for good. 2 5-stars, 11 4-stars, 2 3-stars. They have as many 5-stars as 3-stars. And I wouldn't be shocked if that remains to be the case as this class continues to grow. Wouldn't be shocked at it at all. They have a 92.96 average rank per commit, which is the second highest in the nation, only behind Alabama. And Alabama right now is the 50th ranked recruiting class because they have 6 commits. Typically, Alabama started slow under Nick Saban, did the same thing under Kalen DeBoer. And Ohio State, I know, they start faster in the recruiting process for their classes. But still, it's impressive. And they're only behind USC, who has 13 more commits than they do. So USC is far ahead of everyone else when it comes to commits. And they have a 91.55 average rank per recruit. So they're recruiting higher quality than they ever have and also higher quantity. But Ohio State has a better quality class than USC does. And Ohio State is in play for a variety of 5-stars. Wilder isn't a 5-star, but a very important addition nonetheless. So I wanted to focus on that and then move on to some guys on the board for Ohio State. And Ohio State's board is huge. I mean, this is traditionally a top 3 recruiting program every year. We're at worst 3rd or maybe 4th ranked class, but at worst 3rd or even 2nd in terms of average rank per recruit, and at best 1st. Now, Oregon, Texas, USC are guys who are contending for that who previously didn't. And they're contending for it not on a, USC, I think in 2016 or 17 had a top 5 recruiting class, but that wasn't sustainable, wasn't consistently possible under Clay Helton. It is with this staff and Riley and the alignment they have with NIL. Barring Riley succeeds and they keep the donors engaged. Oregon and Texas's spending and recruiting, I think, is absolutely sustainable. Beyond so. And we know Ohio State recruiting will never be a weakness. It's the same with Alabama. It's the same with Georgia. So you have more guys fighting for that number 1 recruiting class every year. So it's harder. And yet, despite that, Ohio State is warm with Felix Ojo, with Xavier Griffin, with Braylon Womack, Darius Gray, Savion Hyder, Tyler Atkinson, players like Carter Meadows and Derek Cooper, who could be 5-stars at the end of it all. Same with John Turrentine. A lot of offensive tackles. That's Felix Ojo. That's Turrentine. Darius Gray is an interior offensive lineman. Xavier Griffin, linebacker. Braylon Womack, safety. Jet Washington is someone who they want, I believe, but listed as cool per 24/7 Sports. Same with Lamar Brown. But Tyler Atkinson, they're listed as warmer for him. They're in strong contention with him along with Georgia and then Oregon, Clemson, and Alabama are other schools that he's interested in. He visited Oregon this past weekend. It'd be a huge get for the Ducks if they get him. It'd also be a huge get for James Laurinaitis and Ohio State if they were able to land a player of the caliber of Tyler Atkinson. So this Ohio State class, I ask you, if you haven't already, to comment down below and to answer this question specifically. Do you think this Ohio State recruiting class can it be as good as the 2021 class? That 2021 class was legendary. And I know recruiting doesn't work that way. And also, depending on how this year finishes for Ohio State 2025, unless they win it all again and repeat, I think the vast majority of their starters are coming back. And that, combined with roster limitations and the fact that players do want playing time, means that maybe they can't sign a class of the size or caliber, so on, that the 2021 class had. Just because of how college football is different now than it was back in 2020 when that class was being assembled. But regardless, there's a lot of elite players who could be generational, several of them on the board. And I think Ohio State has a really good chance of landing them. I mean, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 5-stars who are on Ohio State's board and listed as warm. I think Ohio State is certainly going to land 2 of those guys, bringing their number of 5-stars at least up to 4, and I could see them landing 3. I could see them landing 4. Maybe in a universe where the balls bounce Ohio State's way and they out-recruit everyone, which it's hard to do because it's hard for one program to out-recruit a bunch of other elite programs, but it's possible. We've seen it before. Maybe they'll land 5 or 6 of them, and right there you're talking about one of the better classes by a good chunk in recent memory. Right there, especially on defense, where Ohio State has 2 5-star linebackers they're going after, a safety, and then also a good class for offensive line and Darius Gray and Felix Ojo and Savion Hyder. If they land him, along with the running back that they also have in their class, forget his name escapes me, but 4-star player, good, from Ohio. I'm not satisfied with just saying that, so I'm going to look him up right now. Favor Aki, who is a 3-star per 24/7 Sports, 4-star according to the composite, will definitely be a 4-star per 24/7 Sports by the end of the 2025 high school football season. So you have it right there. You heard it here. This Ohio State class is on fire. There's a really good chance it could be one of the better and more balanced Ohio State classes in recent memory, especially with how Bowen has done on the offensive line in recruiting and how it seems like with Patricia being involved on defense and Laurinaitis being as good of a recruiter as he is, that there's a chance they can recruit better at linebacker and DB than they have before, or at least better at linebacker. This past cycle's DB class for Ohio State was pretty good. Make sure, if you haven't already, to subscribe, hit the bell. Usually do this earlier in the video, but since it's at the end, may as well. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all soon. Okay, now that we have those out of the way, which is awesome, it felt very good to talk about recruiting. Recruiting is something I want to get into more. I already see 21, we had 7 5-stars, Sam. We won't duplicate that. Probably not, but you never know. I mean, you don't know anymore. I mean, let's look at the 2025 recruiting class, for example. Let's check that out. So in 2025, Georgia, 5 5-stars. Texas, 5 5-stars. Oregon had 4 of them. Alabama and Ohio State each had 3. Some other programs with 5-stars included, or multiple of them, LSU with 2, Michigan with 2. This is, by the way, also factoring in the transfer portal. I think out of high school it may not be possible anymore. Just to reply to that comment, but if you factor in the portal, I think it could still be possible. I'm not ruling out Ohio State, who is a top 3, and even with new contenders, certainly a top 5 recruiting program. I'm not ruling them out getting an insane amount of 5-stars. I can't do that. I can't. Someone also wanted to talk about the Ohio State O-line and why it'll prove me wrong. So I'm actually going to settle this here, since I think we have a lot of Ohio State fans here. Just to put this out publicly, I think Ohio State's O-line is going to be good. I just question whether it's going to be a great unit. I think that if Ohio State had a great offensive line this year, and by great I mean like top 15, top 10, Or let's take the conversation further and say if I thought they had an elite O-line, which is top 5 or better, if I think that they return that, because some people are even going as far to say they return an elite O-line. If they had an elite O-line last year, they blow out Texas. I firmly believe that with how talented Ohio State was at every other position. If you have the supporting cast they had on offense combined with an elite O-line, no one is holding you to under 30 points. That won't happen. Michigan, for example, in the playoffs in 2023 had an elite O-line, but because they had limitations at wide receiver, and by limitations I mean their wide receiver room is not even close to what Ohio State's was last year or even this coming year, which I think will actually be better than the 2024 unit. And their wide receiver room in 2023 was not even close to Ohio State's in 2023 because their best player, Roman Wilson, was not nearly as good as Marvin Harrison Jr. and was not as good as Emeka Ibuka and probably was at the same level, honestly, as Julian Fleming or Carnell Tate that year. Probably worse than Tate, but for a variety of reasons, Ohio State's wide receiver room that year was just not at 100%. It did not play to its potential. An amazing O-line with a quarterback like Howard, with the running backs they had, which were both of the caliber of Kenneth Walker and the wide receivers, absolutely plays at a 2019 LSU efficiency. Well, I'm not going to go that far because Howard isn't Burrow. But at the same time, you have a generational wide receiver prospect in Smith. You have a quarterback in Howard who is good. Chip Kelly and Ryan Day were on fire with what they were doing on offense. You had a first-round offensive tackle, an elite offensive tackle in Donovan Jackson. My point is the line is good. It's good in college, and there are moments where it's great. Whenever I've said it's worse than that, it's not that I think it's an average O-line by college football standards. That'd be insane. It's by Ohio State standards, and Ohio State traditionally has had very good O-lines, so the standard is high. I'm just, from my perspective, what I watched in the playoffs was a staff that knew if they had to lean on their O-line to win games for them, they were going to lose. So they mitigated the O-line. They focused on using a bunch of motion, confusing defenses as much as possible, getting the ball out quickly if they could, and then taking downfield shots when they thought it was advantageous. They tried to spread out the defense as much as possible. That's what they did. This wasn't a team who relied on their O-line protecting Howard all day in the pocket, because that would be insane with the wide receiver production that Ohio State has. Look, I'm not saying it's bad, and I think that it's a good unit, and I think that in 2026, then it will be a Joe Moore Award caliber unit because they'll probably bring everyone back. They'll probably get another great O-lineman like Onenwa in the portal, or maybe even two of them, and you'll get that O-line staff, because it's not just one O-line coach, it's an O-line staff, and most high-level programs have more than one helper with the offensive line now. Like Michigan does. They have more than one. I can be certain and confident that Texas and Georgia and Oregon certainly do. But Ohio State's dedicated a lot of resources there, and they're eventually going to be elite there again. I have absolute confidence in that. It's just, for reasons I've already mentioned, and watch the Texas game, and you have two Kenneth Walker running backs, you have Megatron at wide receiver, a quarterback who has elite pocket awareness and elusiveness and who's a veteran, and you have an offensive-minded Chip Kelly who used to be one of the best. I think nowadays he wasn't one of the best, but still pretty good. And then him combined with Day means you have a brainchild for calling plays on offense, the perfect wide receiver room, the perfect running back room, a quarterback who, despite not being a five-star, was playing like a five-star in the playoffs. If the O-line really was as elite as some of those other position groups, like if the O-line was better than Howard, Texas gets plastered because that team had issues of its own. That team was not a GOAT caliber team. Not even close to one. It had issues. They weren't healthy. Their coaching was not as good as yours. Their program right now is not yours. It's not. If anyone right now says that Texas is a better program and has a better head coach than Ohio State, they're lying. They are. Like that's the most, not the most intellectually dishonest thing I've seen, but that's pretty intellectually dishonest given what Day has done. So that's just me, and that's just my opinion. It's like think of it this way. Sean, in the chat right now, this is someone who disagrees with me on a lot of different things. He says the Texas game is a toss-up. If Ohio State was returning an elite offensive line, the Texas game's not a toss-up. That's like a definitive Ohio State win, because Texas loses 4 of their offensive linemen. They lose a lot of their defensive. Like, Texas is losing a lot too, guys. It's not just Ohio State, and that's one of the reasons Ohio State can win, because Texas is also losing. They're also outside the top 90 in returning production. So, yeah, look, and now there's a Longhorn fan who's mad at me. Ohio, gosh, I can't make anyone happy, and I'm not trying to make people happy. I'm just giving my opinion. The point I'm trying to make, Drew, is that if Ohio State had an elite O-line last year, they would have been 2020 Alabama, and they weren't. They weren't even close to that level of offensive efficiency. They weren't. And why was that? Because their skill positions were awesome, but quarterback had some talent limitations, and that O-line was busted after the injuries, and it never really recovered. The staff just was able to scheme so well, and they'll probably do this again this year, which is why I don't think the O-line will be a problem. I'm just saying, again, what I'm saying is that if you're predicting it to be a Joe Moore Award caliber unit, I'm not going to tell you you're wrong because it's the preseason, but I just think there needs to be some caution. Something else to say, where you only point to one really good game in the playoff. What about the other 3? The Notre Dame game was impressive because Ohio State ran the football more, and that's really what the O-line struggled with, was run blocking for the entirety of the year after the injuries. The Tennessee game, the O-line surrendered nearly double-digit TFLs. I think that game was exposing Tennessee's defense for what it was. And then in the Oregon game, Ohio State was never in a position to rely on their O-line. They never had to. Oregon was never in a position to exploit their NFL D-line versus Ohio State's college O-line. They were never in the position to do that, because it doesn't matter that Derek Harmon is beating Carson Hinsman when Jeremiah Smith is 10 yards down the field ahead of Oregon's corner, or when he can beat 3 Oregon corners in coverage. Oregon DBs. Like, at that point, along with Ohio State creating 8 sacks, easily 50% of which were coverage sacks because Ohio State's corners stepped up, their safeties stepped up, Jim Knowles called an amazing game. At that point, it no longer matters that one of your units is weaker than its opposing unit, because all of your other units are just owning the other team's units. And I think that's simple, but that's just me. And again, it's a good unit. If it were a average or below average unit, I am pretty sure they don't beat Penn State last year. I'm pretty sure that they probably, I'm pretty sure they don't run the way they did on Notre Dame at times, or they don't run the way they did earlier in the year when the O-line was healthy. It's an above average good unit for college foot for national standards. It's just, I think I've confused at times viewers by saying, like, by playing it to the Ohio State standard or playing it to the college football standard. Sometimes I get the language mixed up, and that's not fair to people. So that's just what I'm saying. What about our tight end and other receivers? What conversation are you talking about? What if Texas brackets Jeremiah Smith and OSU can't run the ball? Oh, that's actually a great question. So now we're getting into Q&A stuff, and I want to save that for the end, but now that I'm on a tangent, I will answer this. What will happen there is that Ohio State will still be able to create somewhat sustainable drives because their receivers are that good, and they have Max Clare at tight end. But since it's game 1, and it's Sayan's first start, and we haven't seen much of him against we haven't seen much of him on the field. And the parts we have seen of him have not all been good. If Texas were to do that again, the only way I could see Ohio State winning is if they got a defensive score. Because, to be fair, even though we haven't seen Arch play in a ton of games, and in the big games he didn't succeed, we've seen him play a lot more than Sayin. He has a year ahead of Sayin. He was viewed as a better prospect out of high school than Sayin was. And the other thing, too, is while Ohio State returns more on the O-line than Texas does, Texas is recruited better there. And Texas also gets healthier and better at running back, while Ohio State loses 2 generational college running backs. And one of them might be a generational NFL back. I mean, they played their hearts out, their butts off, and they were just about perfect, the running backs were. For a minute there, I thought that Judkins was a little bit overrated in the fall, but that was the O-line. That was not him. The minute they fixed their scheme, he was awesome. So when he was struggling, it was never him. It was just the O-line and run blocking was just that bad to where not even Judkins could average 4 yards per carry in November, which circle back to my earlier talking point, but it's whatever. And Carnell Tate isn't overrated. Carnell Tate's a first-round wide receiver. You just had Emeka Ibuka and Jeremiah Smith in front of him so he couldn't get 1,000 yards, especially since Ohio State doesn't run up tempo, which to a certain degree I don't understand why they wouldn't run up tempo. The more plays you have in a given game of football, the more talent and depth they're going to take over. And Ohio State, even with all they lose, is going to be deep, and they're uber talented. Uber talented. I've talked to other Ohio State people who are more knowledgeable about the game than I am and who are closer to the team than I am, and they've also said the same thing. They're like, I don't get why Ryan Day doesn't go up tempo with all the players we have. Like, we'd wear down teams by the fourth and the game would be over. We would minimize the risk of upsets, but I'm also not a coach, so they know better than I do. If Texas were to do that, though, if they were to bracket Smith and Smith couldn't do a lot, and then more importantly, it's that if Ohio State couldn't run, then they lose. Because Texas's defense is that good. And Texas, based on me studying the rosters and looking at Manning is more mobile than Sayin. He's more experienced than Sayin. He's more talented than Sayin. And Texas brought in their own great tight end, Jack Endries, to replace Gunnar Helm. And they have talented wide receivers. I think that while Texas does not have the same ceiling Ohio State does on offense, I think their floor is much higher entering this game offensively, because there's more familiarity at quarterback. There is about equal familiarity at tight end, less at wide receiver, but I think everyone would say that you probably trust Kyle Flood's O-line in terms of their floor compared to Ohio State's O-line floor. Ohio State's O-line might have a higher ceiling out of the gate because they return a lot more experience, but you also have to factor in that Ohio State's changing play callers. Texas isn't. So they don't have Jeremiah Smith, but they also have a lot more familiarity overall factoring in the off-field than the Buckeyes do. So if Ohio State's offense can't run, then Texas will lock them down. Ohio State will if Smith isn't open and they can't run the ball, Ohio State won't even score more than 14 or 17 points. I mean, look at the Texas game last year where Ohio State struggled to run. It's not that their run was totally shut down, but they struggled to run the ball. They only scored 14 points on sustainable drives. The other was a screen pass by a freak athlete, which probably wouldn't be replicated in week 1 by this running back room. And the other touchdown was a defensive score. So circle back to my initial point. If Texas locks down Smith and then Ohio State can't run, it will take Ohio State scoring on defense or holding Texas to 10 or fewer points in order to win, which both of those things are possible. We saw the defensive score last year, and this defense will be really good. And Texas has a lot of newness on offense, but it would make a Texas win incredibly likely. Incredibly likely. Someone just said CJ Carr is more talented than Julian Sayin. That's probably ridiculous, but Carr was also almost a 5-star, so if I say that that's ridiculous and then Carr ends up balling out under Mike Denbrock, who's a top 3 offensive coordinator nationally. That would not age well. Not everyone can stop the run with one guy like Michigan did, however, and the run wasn't really stopped except for by Day or Kelly. Isaac says that Texas was a lot secondary from last year and we upgraded receiver-wise. I agree with that, actually. Texas probably downgrades a little bit at DB, and Ohio State gets better at wide receiver. I agree with those. But Texas does get much better at linebacker because they moved Trey Moore there and they return Anthony Hill. And I think their D-line will basically reload like it did last year, especially with Simmons coming back. I think Alex January will probably take steps forward. And then with all the D tackles they got in the portal who did play snaps last year, come on. They have like 8 capable bodies they could roll out there and play at a good collegiate level, which is insane. Absolutely insane. Yeah, I think I actually started an argument that was rather productive for the channel in the chat. And the good news is, they ain't scared of Arch at all. Well, Drew, they probably should be. They probably should be, because Ohio State lose all of their best players on the front. All of their best players. So, who's going to spy Manning? Who is going to read him on zone reads? All of these players will be fresh starters. Outside of Atkinson, who will then again be in a new system and will be playing a team in Texas who is far tougher than any team he played last year. Like, whoever Atkinson lines up with, him at D end opposed to whoever he lines up at tackle, will probably be the best tackle or one of the best tackles he's ever played against. So, to not at all be a little bit nervous about Arch Manning is, I would say, incredibly moronic. It's the same thing with Julian Sayin. You can't underestimate Julian Sayin either. I mean, both of those QBs, but especially Arch because he has the extra year and more games played, you can't underestimate them. I mean, that would be an incredible error. Incredible error. Okay, we've been live for so long. I'm going to go over. But I do want to spend a few minutes here, like 20, 30 minutes, talking about some other things. And at the end, keep everything going, guys, in the comment section. At the end, I'll have a 10, 15-minute Q&A session. If you want me to answer your question and not just search for questions or talk about whatever I'm interested in, send a super chat with your question, and I will be obligated to answer it. So, thank you very much. Let's move on and talk about Michigan State. You all should be buying into Michigan State. Michigan State should be talked about at a national level. It should be. And if you're tuning in, by the way, and wondering why is this guy not talking about Ohio State or Michigan like he promised, it's earlier in the show. Just rewind. Neat thing about YouTube is you can rewind and then catch up. Just do that. Thank you very much. And make sure to like the video if you haven't already, and do indeed subscribe to the channel. So, Michigan State should be talked about nationally. And the Spartans are a proud program. Did you know that? Did you know that Michigan State all-time is a top 25, top 20 program? Did you know that? Because the way people talk about Michigan State tells me that, no, they didn't know that. And that's rather disappointing because you only have to go, a decade or 11 years back to see them reaching the playoffs and to see them beating Urban Meyer at home in the Horseshoe, who no one else did except Lincoln Riley in his first year with Oklahoma, with a team that probably should have won the Natty based on what they almost did to Georgia that year. It choked. I know if you're an Oklahoma fan, I'm sorry for bringing up that terrible memory, but I mentioned Michigan State in all of that because they have made the playoffs before. They are a top 20 program all time. I mean, you look at Michigan State historically. All time, 733 wins, 490 losses. They almost have a all-time win percentage of 60%. It's pretty impressive. They have 6 claimed titles. 3 of them are recognized. A playoff appearance, 12 conference titles. They won the division 3 times. 2 times were in, I forget if it was the Legends or Leaders division, and then 1 time in 2015. They won 10 games in 2017, a New Year's Six Bowl in 2021. I mean, this is a program you can come to and you can win. And I'm a big fan of Mark D'Antonio and what he did at Michigan State, and I think he proves you can win at Michigan State. He won in the modern era at Michigan State, where Saban and Meyer and at times, USC, whether it was under Kiffin or Helton, or when you look at Auburn, Gus Malzahn brought in some really good classes, or Michigan under Harbaugh or Hoke, or even Rich Rod brought in top 10 classes. And he was just, recruiting at an okay level, mostly 3 stars, some 4 stars, occasionally a 5-star here and there. And from 13 to 15, they won 13 games one year, 11 games the next year, and then 12 games the following year. I mean, that right there, you're talking about 36 wins in 3 seasons, winning 12 games on average per season. And in that stretch, he went 2-1 against Ohio State under Urban Meyer, who's a legend. So I'm probably rambling a bit here, but I'm telling you all, Michigan State's a top 20, top 25 program all time. They have a big endowment. They have billionaire donors. And before we continue with this, and almost my passionate defense of Michigan State football and telling you why you should buy in, please subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, like the video, and comment where you see Michigan State football in 5 years. And while this is not a basketball channel, I know Michigan State basketball is a big deal, and the new AD will help out there. So tell me what you see from Michigan State basketball in 5 years too. Just to say all those things, Michigan State bringing in Jay Batt, who previously worked at Alabama, East Carolina, Georgia Tech was his first ever AD job, and he made the decision to hire Brent Key. I would say that's panned out well. Georgia Tech recruiting leveled up. He made a decision to move the annual rivalry game with Georgia to a neutral field every other year, typically when Georgia Tech used to get a home game, and that would give Georgia Tech a few $1 million. He was able to raise $500 million to renovate Bobby Dodd Stadium, and I will tell you this, Georgia Tech as a football program has been down recently. They've not had the recent success that Michigan State did. I know they won a title sometime in the 20th century. They've had good seasons before. So I'm not going to... Actually, I will tell you whether Michigan State or Georgia Tech is a better all-time program. And I can tell you that thanks to Kyle Umlang, who does a very good job of tracking blue bloods and the best college football programs of all time. Umlang is awesome and does all these fancy graphics and data gathering to make what I think is a pretty incredible analysis of things. So, not to go off on too much of a tangent here, but looking at the blue blood rankings, just looking at them, it appears that Michigan State's ahead of Georgia Tech, but both are top 25 programs. And again, Tech has more recently struggled than Michigan State to a larger degree. You remember the Jeff Collins era? It was worse than the average Michigan State season of the Mel Tucker era, which was, in all honesty, pretty atrocious. And Michigan State's in the Big Ten. They have more money to throw around than Georgia Tech does, and they're more interested in sports than Georgia Tech is, I would confidently say. So to a program like Michigan State, which is better than Georgia Tech, I think Batt's going to succeed. And you look at Michigan State recruiting right now, like honestly, it's not where it needs to be. And last year, it was 42nd nationally with 41 commits, average recruit rank of an 86.51. It was Smith's first year, but still, recruiting outside the top 40 typically won't get you a lot. It got D'Antonio somewhere, but D'Antonio was also that elite. I think that D'Antonio in the 2010s in his prime was the best head coach in the Big Ten. Like, I think from 13 to 15, he was a better coach than Meyer. Meyer was just at Ohio State and inherited a better situation from Tressel and then built on that with the resources he had, making his job, I think, easier than what D'Antonio had. I think D'Antonio in that stretch was a genuinely better head coach than Meyer. Not saying all time, but in that stretch, he was. So again, exception to the rule. I'm very high on Smith. I think that Jonathan Smith is one of the most underrated coaches in the country. And I will tell you that I think Michigan State's staff is one of the better staffs in the Big Ten. You just didn't see it last year because the roster was that talentless. And when a talentless roster suffers injuries and plays a tough schedule, they'll usually have a losing record no matter how good the staff is. Remember, even Nick Saban, and Smith's not Nick Saban, but even Saban went 7-6 in year one at Alabama, and Michigan State probably played a tougher schedule than that Alabama team did and had a more talentless roster. So I don't hold last year against Smith all that much. I don't. And this season, this recruiting cycle for 2026, they have a 4-star, 9 3-stars, average recruit rank of an 86.95, total of 10 commits. And when you look at their board, I'm not telling you that it's the most impressive board in the world. Most of it is a bunch of 3-stars, but they do have some 4-stars that they are involved with. And I think that what you want if you're Smith with J-Bat is to get some more 4-stars than you had last year. Just a little bit more. Not even 25% of the recruiting class, because I think that's a little unrealistic. And then you want to do better in the portal, and you want to retain the good players that you have. Michigan State's still rebuilding from Tucker making the roster worse than it was at the end of the D'Antonio era, which was pretty bad, pretty battered, not a whole lot of development or scheming going on there. You should buy into Michigan State football because they have an athletic director who can turn Bobby Dodd Stadium, a stadium that is not even full most of the time. He can get people to invest $500 million into renovating that stadium in an ACC program that does not care about football as much as your average Big Ten or SEC. It may not even care as much as your average Big 12 program at football. I don't know Georgia Tech a whole lot, so if I said anything there that was inaccurate, correct me. But from what I understand, talking to some people a little bit, and also just based on what has happened at Georgia Tech, a lot of those things bear at least some weight to them. That's why you should buy into Michigan State, because even if Smith doesn't work out, and the Smith file from his time at Oregon State, and Oregon State is one of those jobs in football that is harder than Michigan State, and his final year in the Pac-12, tough schedule. Prior year, I mean, every schedule is tough in the Pac-12 when you're Oregon State because you're basically incapable of getting a top 25 recruiting class. It'll never happen in Corvallis, and never was going to happen without some grand exception. He had Oregon State, top 25, power rated. He had Oregon State winning 10 games. He had Oregon State winning those 10 games with like Ben Gulbranson or Trevor Jebbia. And then he had them winning 8 games in contention for beating a top 5 Washington team with DJ Uiagalelei, who had his best season ever with Oregon State. So the point being, with Smith's track record of slowly but surely building programs, or at least program in Oregon State into kind of a physical juggernaut, who was one of the better Pac-12 teams on defense, and certainly in rushing offense and offensive line play and development. And then looking at Bat's track record, worked with Saban at Alabama, and Saban had nothing but praise for him. Helped Georgia Tech, I think, resurrect their football program a little bit. Not just a little bit, but entirely responsible for that, actually. I think you should buy in. I think it'd be a grave mistake not to. Even if you don't buy into Smith, you need to buy into Michigan State football in the long haul. I think within 5 years, certainly within 10 years, I think that this program will not be missing bowl games. And in fact, I don't even think that will be viewed as their floor within that time frame. I think that their floor will once again be just going bowling, and this team will be viewed at some points as a college football playoff contender. I genuinely believe that much in Michigan State football with the move they made at AD. And a little bit more importantly, but athletic director and fundraising is still extremely important because of the coaching staff that I think they have right now with Jonathan Smith and his assistants. Okay, get to move on now to Oregon's defensive line, which a lot of people have. So this is, if you're an Ohio State fan watching this, you should subscribe for this sole reason. A lot of people, and I mention Ohio State because Ohio State right now is, Ohio State's always in the news because their fan base is the biggest, but also they're in the news because they won it all, and they're not the unanimous favorites. So I don't know. For a variety of reasons, Ohio State's kind of everywhere right now in college football, mostly because of the Natty, but also because the drama that surrounds them, the fan base, whether you think it's, deserved or not, which I usually don't think it is. Like, even when Day was on the hot seat last year, I kind of always thought that was a bunch of BS. It's like, you can't put a guy who wins 10, 11 games every year in possibility of being fired. Even if Ohio State was capable of doing that, I don't think they would unless it happened for 10 years in a row, only won 10 or 11 games and couldn't win at all. And if they did that in the time frame that people were saying they should, they'd be morons because you'd have the risk of cratering the program if you fired him. The point being, Ohio State loses a lot in their D-line, and people are pointing that out and saying, like, hey, Buckeyes lose a lot on D-line, and the staff's concerned. You should not view that unit as elite or even close. And I say, well, yeah, like, absolutely. Absolutely. Like, I don't think that unit's close to elite. They have the potential to be, but they're not close. But then people are pointing to Oregon's D-line. And Oregon's D-line, to be fair, I know has out-recruited Ohio State in recent memory. And I think their position coach is probably at least on track to being better than who LJ is right now. But regardless, Oregon loses 2 NFL D tackles, and their 2 deep is entirely redshirt freshmen or true freshmen, and no one is pointing to them and saying, hey, that unit has some holes. If they get one injured player, they could fall apart. No one's pointing to that. And I think that when I look at Oregon, the D-line's very interesting, and it could determine aspects of the season. On one hand, they lose a bunch, and they didn't go in the portal, so they're betting on themselves. The staff thinks highly of this Oregon defensive line. They do. And I'm talking about the defensive line. I'm not talking about the offensive line. Just saw a comment there. So if I said offensive line, I meant to say the defensive line. That's what I meant to say. So when I see that, I think to myself, I think this unit is in... I think this unit is like Ohio State's. I think that its floor is probably higher because they've recruited better and they don't lose as much because they return both ends. Ohio State loses all 4 of their players. So I think Oregon's floor on D-line is certainly higher than Ohio State's, and I think their ceiling is too. But it's not like they don't have concerns. They don't have, for example, they don't have like what Penn State returns, where they return an All-American D tackle and a potential All-American D end. They don't have what Clemson does, where they return a vast majority of their starters, and other things. And then Michigan loses more in terms of starting numbers than Oregon does, but Michigan's a lot older on D-line and has more returning snaps in total. So Oregon's D-line is kind of a mystery. And then I also see someone else talking about it's deserved. We have a bunch of lunatics in our fan base. I mean, yes, Ohio State's fan base is people that threatened Ryan Day. And personally, I think the people who think that it will be the best O-line in America are lunatics, for example. It's the same thing with people who think that Matt Patricia... If you think Matt Patricia's better than Jim Knowles, that's insane. You should get your head checked. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about the Oregon defensive line and how I think this defensive line is... It's going to have a lot of potential, but I also think there's going to be some growing pains. So, a question that's been posed to me. I'm going to have to look up his name in the Discord server before my phone dies because it's at 5%. You know, these things happen. These things are normal. These things are what college football fans love. Okay, here we have it here. What do you think Oregon's ceiling is on the defensive line? What's their ceiling? Oregon returns both of their defensive ends, but loses both of their defensive tackles. One of whom, Derek Harmon, was drafted in the first round. Jamari Caldwell was drafted, I believe, in the top 3 rounds. So that's losing a lot there for Oregon, who for the first time in a while had multiple NFL-level defensive tackles in Derek Harmon and Jamari Caldwell. They return Mateo Uyunglele and Tatum Tuioti, I think is how you say his name, but maybe I'm misremembering it. Very good defensive ends. Both of those are coming back, but there's not a lot of proven production coming in or coming back on the D tackle room. For example, Bear Alexander is projected to be a starting defensive tackle for Oregon, and in his career at USC, he didn't even start for a whole season, ever. And I think maybe he started for most of 2023, but still he was just kind of a good pass rusher and average, below average overall player. And that defense with Grinch was an absolute mess. So there are questions at defensive tackle. There are. And an Oregon fan asked me this question in my Discord server. So I am going to give a plug to my Discord server, of course. Please join it, because anyone can join the Discord server. It's free. Links in the description. Anyone can join it. And if you navigate to the YouTube mailbox channel, you can ask me a question, any question, and it will be turned into a video on Wednesdays when we do our withdrawal Wednesdays. And since it's early enough in the preseason, any preseason questions you have to ask, they'll probably be answered. So who asked this question? Let me find it. I lost it. It's hard to navigate on your phone and laptop during a live show where I'm my own producer. But anyway, QS Spear, or Q Spear 02. Cool name, by the way. He asks, what do you think is the ceiling for the defensive line? Now, Oregon went 13-1 last year, undefeated in the Big Ten. They were the only team to go undefeated in the regular season, or really even close to it. First in the Big Ten, both in the regular season, and then if you factor in the Big Ten championship game, they were also first. They lost to Ohio State in a huge fashion in the playoffs, but none of those issues in the playoffs for Oregon in the Rose Bowl were due to the D-line. I mean, I saw the stat. This actually shows how good the D-line was. I saw a stat that basically said Derek Harmon owned Carson Hinsman in the Rose Bowl. Like, he was outplaying him, he was beating him, he was pushing him, he was beating him. Like, Hinsman had a PFF grade in the 50s in that game, and Harmon had a pretty good PFF grade. And Caldwell, I think, did pretty well as well. But then everyone else on Oregon's defense, really outside of the defensive line, whether it's the linebackers taking bad angles, the DBs couldn't cover, Oregon's O-line, I actually think, didn't do all that poorly. But the problem is when your receivers can't get open downfield and your quarterback is short, he needs forever in the pocket, and Ohio State's pass rush was just too good for that, especially with Simon lurking as a spy, and then Ohio State being willing to stack the box, and it worked. This D-line for Oregon last year was a huge part of the reason they won 13 games. I mean, it saved them literally against Wisconsin when they won by 3. It helped them against Ohio State the first time around, where they won the line of scrimmage in that game, huge part because of their D-line against the Ohio State O-line. It helped against Penn State a little bit, more so in pass rush, though, than run defense. But they were able to get some pressure on Aller at times. It was never the problem. The defensive line for Oregon was never, ever the problem. Just wasn't. And they return an All-American, I think, in Mateo Uyunglele there. Absolutely an All-American. And then they return, I think, an All-Big Ten player on the other side. So you look at that with Oregon, and you got to think you're pretty secure at the end. There's an argument to be made that Oregon will have the best defensive end duo, the best edge duo in the country. There's an argument for that. Whether it's Tatum Tuioti or Mateo Uyunglele. They could be Mateo Uyunglele could be the best D end in football this year. And and then him and Tuioti could make up the best edge duo. That's secure. And then behind them, they have Blake Purchase, highly recruited out of high school, and then they have Elijah Rushing, who almost went to Arizona. Oregon took him, 5-star. The staff is raving about him. I don't think he's going to get on the field and be an All-American immediately, or even an All-Big Ten caliber player, but he could be an All-Big Ten caliber player, and I think he'll be in the rotation. And I think Oregon's pass rush on edge will be better this year than it was last year. The question for Oregon, and really the whole D-line's not just ceiling but floor too, is D-tackle. That's the area you have to look at. I know that they only got Bear Alexander in the portal. And the fact that they bring back Amari Washington, who is a rotational player there, backup nose tackle, is good. And I think Amari Washington is an all Big Ten caliber player. I think he's great. However, Bear Alexander, a bit unproven, was not very good at USC. I mean, didn't even crack the rotation all that much in 2024. And then behind both of them are redshirt freshmen, Tioni Gray and Aiden Breland. And Breland is dealing with a little bit of an injury. I love Breland, by the way. I think Breland's going to be a stud. And I think Washington could be that. And if they can fix on and off the field issues with Alexander, talent's never been an issue for him. But the staff definitely took a risk. I mean, Bear Alexander may not pan out. And then to have only one great defensive tackle, when I would say to win it all, you need at least 5 or 6 capable bodies and probably 4, great or good collegiately defensive tackles. That is with rare exception, of course, because there's always exception to the rule. Just wanted to add a necessary asterisk to that comment about winning it all. That'll determine everything right there. I mean, Mari Washington had 4 total tackles last year. Rotated, played in a few, I think more than 100 snaps, but rotational player. Bear Alexander last year only had 3 solo tackles, 1 QB hurry, and then in 2023 he had 1.5 sacks, 3 QB hurries, 6.5 TFLs, and talent's never been an issue for him, but there's a reason he didn't crack the rotation all that much. Clearly, unless you think that Eric Henderson and D'Anton Lynn are idiots, which they're not because they fielded one of the best Lincoln Riley defenses ever with none of the talent that Riley had on defense at Oklahoma, not even close. So when I look at Oregon's defensive line, I think to myself that it is a unit with, I'll say it right now, they have a limitless ceiling. If they play their cards right there, and I think that Oregon's staff is one of the best staffs in the country. I think that the only thing holding this staff back is Tosh Lupoy. I grade staffs, and I'm done grading all of the staffs for what I think are my top 10 teams, really top 15 teams. And I'm going to get all my staff grades for all the Power 4 teams done before the season kicks off. That'll be especially helpful for previewing 2026 and even going over what's happening in 2025, because I'll be very familiar with even the lower level assistant position coaches. I'll be more familiar with that. I think Oregon is a really good D-line coach. And I think that their position coaches on defense overall are great. I think that they would have a 5 grade. They'd have a 5 score. They'd have a 5 score staff, which in my view, a 5 staff grade means that you have a national title caliber staff. Like you don't have Nick Saban, the head coach, so you'll never have what that entails, but you have close to a Saban level staff. You have close to one of the best, if not the best staff in the country. There are only 2 staffs right now I have graded as 5s. They are Texas and they are Penn State, who are also coincidentally my top 2 teams in college football this year. When I look at Oregon, I think that Tony Tuioti is one of the better defensive line coaches in the country. I think the way he's recruited at a high level is awesome, and Lupoy certainly helps with that. And I think the way Mateo Uyunglele and Tatum Tuioti have panned out are also a testament to that. And look, Amari Washington, been with the program since high school. He's been retained, and whenever he did play, he looked good. And I believe in Oregon's defensive line as a great defensive line nationally. Its ceiling is elite in being one of the best in college football, but you also have to understand that he mainly asked about ceiling there. So that's kind of where we'll end it off, is the ceiling portion. But also, the ceiling could be lower than I expect, because if the floor is as low as it could be if few things or just less than half of the players who are going to have to step up pan out, the floor might be low enough to where it does drag down the ceiling, because I don't think they don't have a player who can pull up the entire unit in such a way to where he masks two bad players or 2 or 3 underperforming players. Uyunglele's elite. I don't know if he's that generational. A player like Chase Young, for example, at D end, or Aiden Hutchinson can do that. I don't know if Uyunglele is quite that just yet. Could be for sure. And that's why I think, in part, along with how they've recruited and developed there, I think this D-line ceiling is ultimately limitless. This could be a top 5 D-line in football. Certainly will be one of the better D-lines in the Big Ten, for sure. I'm very high on Uyunglele, very high on Tatum Tuioti. I love Amari Washington. Questions about Bear Alexander and about the depth more so. The ceiling is high. It is. It could be lower than I think, however, because they do have questions at depth. They do lose both NFL defensive tackles they had last year. And especially if an injury occurs, the ceiling of this unit will probably collapse if there's an injury to one of the starters long term, because of how young the position group is. In 2026, this unit's going to be insane based on how they've recruited and the depth chart they have. And last but not least, we will talk about Michigan. And then after Michigan, I'll answer any of your questions if you posit a super chat in the comment section. Let's see what everyone's saying in the chat. Does Oregon still have the baseball guy at linebacker? Yes, Abdul, they do. They still have Bryce Betcher. If they fired Tosh, Mateo would leave along with many others. We just need someone different calling plays. Interesting. I never would have guessed that. Do you really think he's that big, where if they were to fire him, guys would leave? Really? I know he's an ace recruiter. So obviously when you have an ace recruiter and then you fire him, you have that risk now with the portal. But I'm asking out of curiosity, because I almost believe, like, if you fired, let's say Oregon fired Lupoy after the Rose Bowl, and then instead of Penn State getting Jim Knowles, they got Jim Knowles. I don't know who would leave after watching how Jim Knowles' defense played. I genuinely believe that if Oregon wants to field the top 5 defense, they'll have to get rid of Lupoy calling plays. Doesn't mean they have to fire him, especially with the new assistant rules. But if they hired an elite defensive coordinator, pardon me, my nose is itching again. If they hired an elite defensive coordinator, I don't know who would leave. Like, why would you leave? Oh, yeah, Mateo said he came back for Tosh. Interesting. Okay. Well, honestly, Mateo will probably be gone after this year. Probably. Michael Valdez, love the haircut, Sam. I'm ready for a full year of Dana Holgorsen at Nebraska. I did not do a Nebraska question. I did not this time. But there will be one answered in the future, and there will be Nebraska content coming out next week for sure. Probably this week, too. I'll find something to talk about for Nebraska. You always have to talk about Nebraska as a rule for myself, and really for any serious college football channel. The fan base is too big and the program's too proud, and their ceiling is too talented. It just is. And thank you, Isaac, by the way, for the $5 super chat. I will answer that after this segment on Michigan. But thank you for that. I will keep tabs on that. I'm hearting the super chat right now. And yeah, we'll get to it. First and foremost, I want to talk about whether Michigan can become a program that only reloads. So a good friend of the channel, Gyro, an Ohio State fan who's very active in my Discord server, link to that's below, it's totally free. I encourage you to join. He asked me a question in relationship to Michigan and Michigan being able to be a program that can only reload and never rebuild. That was the premise of his question. Michigan last year went 8-5, 5-4. They finished in the top half of the Big Ten after winning it all, and they did beat Ohio State and they beat Alabama, who were top 4 power-rated teams per FPI. It was a rebuilding year. No matter how you phrase it, because I've heard some Michigan fans say that the season was actually not a failure. It was a failure. Anyone who says that Michigan's season last year was not a failure is insane. It's insane. Either that or they don't view Michigan as a serious contender. They view Michigan as a has-been or someone who shouldn't be a blue blood. Or they view Michigan as a team that's lucky to be a top 25 program, which again, circle back to it, that's nuts. That's insane. A team that should only be lucky to be top 25 does not have the history they do, does not have the most wins in college football history. They do not have a top 5 win percentage in college football history. And they don't have the ability at the same time as those things to get a donor to pay a generational quarterback $2 million at a high school. It doesn't happen. They also don't recruit. They also, a team is just lucky to be top 25 doesn't recruit at a top 15, top 20 level every year at the very worst, and then has the potential to recruit at the top 5. Again, insanity. Last season, by any reasonable standard for Michigan, was an absolute failure. The only thing that prevented Michigan from getting a F grade and instead gave them a D grade was the Ohio State game. And then to a certain degree, the Alabama game, because most of Alabama's players played, a lot of Michigan's didn't. So Michigan's backups were able to overcome Alabama's starters, and that was good. But also Alabama at the end of the year was nowhere close to what they were at the beginning of the year. It was Alabama's worst team in terms of overall level of play since 2007 with Nick Saban. It, in truth, was that bad. There were moments where the team, I think, showed flashes of having a higher ceiling than the 2023 team showed, but you didn't have Saban's coaching. You didn't have the same floor consequentially because of the lack of discipline. Anyway, I just don't think that win was program defining. If there was any win last year that was program defining, I think that it would have been the Ohio State game. And even then, Ohio State did some things to help themselves lose in that game. To be fair, Michigan did things to help themselves win too. They did a better job covering Ohio State wide receivers than most did. They did it in an intelligent way too. If they couldn't cover Jeremiah Smith, they just ripped him down. That takes intelligence right there, and that's good coaching. Offensively, in that game, they were able to, a lot of the time because they were able to wear down Ohio State's defense due to Ohio State's offense punting all the time or turning it over, but they were able to push Ohio State's D-line more than anyone else that I saw all season long outside of Oregon's offensive line. So I think that shows something to Michigan program-wise under the current regime. I think that under Brycen Moore, for Michigan to be a program that only reloads, they have to recruit at minimum top 10. And before I tell you the other thing, please subscribe, like the video, hit the notification bell. Also hit the notification bell on the Michigan podcast that I do. My Michigan podcast is just a collection of Michigan videos on my YouTube channel. So that way, if you're only interested in Michigan football, you can just follow when I talk about Michigan football. So do that. It's free. The link to that's in the description. You'll see it pop up, desktop or phone, whatever you use, you'll see it. The other thing is the staff. The staff has to be better than it was last year. Now it will be because Lindsey's a big upgrade over Kurt Campbell. Lindsey's had multiple OC jobs, never really been fired, at least from what I can remember, has had success wherever he goes, at least at an average level. Kurt Campbell has always underperformed expectations wherever he's been. I think that Michigan has to recruit top 10 at bare minimum, and they have to have an elite staff. And the worse the staff is, the higher the recruiting has to be. If the staff can't be elite every year, if it can't be top 5 or not top 10, top 5. If the staff isn't going to be close to what I would call a 5 grade, where almost all your coaches are A-level, top 10 in their respective areas coaches, you can have one exception. It happens with everyone. Michigan, for example, I think the exception to that in 23 was Ron Bellamy. I think he was the worst position coach on the team, quite frankly. and still he was okay. Wasn't bad, but wasn't good either. And everyone else I think was at least great or elite. When I think about the tandem of coaching, recruiting, and development, Michigan has to be a lead at strength and conditioning. They have to have great coordinators, great position coaches. They all have to be involved in recruiting. And if they're not a top 5 staff, then you probably have to recruit at a top 5 level and not just a top 10 level. Or maybe now, because the top recruiting classes are not as good as they used to be, because there is more competition, and with the transfer portal players and NIL, players want to get more playing time and leverage that. So you're not going to see a 2021 Alabama or 2021 Ohio State recruiting class as often as you used to. You're not going to see one program, unless it's probably Texas, dominate the number 1 class every year. And that's just because Texas is talent rich and they have one of the largest, if not the largest, budgets to pay players. So that's an exception to the rule. Those are what I think Michigan needs to constantly reload. I mean, Harbaugh, for example, he wasn't able to consistently reload and not rebuild, because constantly reloading means you do what Ryan Day has done. You do what Nick Saban did. That was more than just reloading, though. That was you reload and then you're able to still fire at the same clip rate on average. Day reloaded and won his first natty in 6 years, which is still extremely impressive. I'm just saying that counts as reloading too. If you're defining reloading as only doing what Saban did, then that's impossible. Michigan is not going to ever do that. Because I wouldn't pick Alabama to ever do that again either. I need to see someone be Nick Saban before I pick them to be Nick Saban. It just has to happen that way. So that's my opinion. If Michigan wants to be a program that only reloads, they got to recruit top 10 every year at the bare minimum. Maybe you can occasionally get away with falling outside the top 10 as long as you make up for it in the portal or you recruit a large class and you're elite developmentally. But it's just easier to recruit top 10 or top 5, especially with the money and resources Michigan has, and make sure you have a great elite staff. Like, choose one of the things to focus on, but make sure you don't miss the other one either. Michigan last year, they recruited really, really well, and they have, I think, better NIL and even maybe better recruiters than they did under Harbaugh. But my gosh, the development was just not there. It wasn't, and the in-game coaching wasn't either. And if you don't fix that, you're going to lose the top recruits. You just will. So Moore needs to improve. The Chip Lindsey hire needs to pan out. Martindale needs to improve, and he did toward the end of last year. So I'm not going to be as hard on him, even though at one point I wanted him gone. And then the assistant coaches have to keep getting better, and many of them are young, so there's room for them to improve. And recruiting has to be a priority, and thankfully it is. I mean, there is a world, yes, a world where Michigan is a program that almost always only reloads. But it's not right now. I think that last year was a rebuilding year. I think this year could be a breakthrough year, but not in the national title way. In a way similar to Oregon last year, where you win the Big Ten, win a bunch of games, and then in the playoff, you probably have some issues that'll get exposed. 9.5, 9.9 times out of 10, at the very least. That's my thoughts on Michigan and whether they can become a program that only reloads or how they can do it. Thank you, Gyro, for asking that question. I really appreciate it. Yeah. Top 10, top 5 classes. And something that Michigan is doing right now that's really good is they're getting top 100 quarterbacks, or at least from what Brady Smigiel is projected to be by 24/7 Sports Composite, they're going to get back-to-back top 100 players at the quarterback position. And by that I mean overall. Smigiel's the 8th best quarterback per composite, and Underwood was the number 1. If they can recruit really well at QB and then develop well there and continue their tradition on the O-line and defense, then absolutely they will become a program that 9 times out of 10 reloads instead of rebuilds. And we're done. Awesome. Awesome. We have 5 videos that'll be released in clip form. Thank you so much for being on, everyone. Now let's get to the super chat here, and then I'm starving. So after this, I'm gonna get off, and I'm gonna eat, and then I'm actually gonna go work for a friend for an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours. Just a chill little job that I like. Pretty fun. Unlike this job, it's pretty brainless, you know? It's just helping remodel a home. He gives me tasks, and since they're tasks that I know how to do, or it's just using tools, it's simple. It's honestly simpler than this. Harder physically, tire you out more, but there's not the same mental aspect to this. Where like when I'm live right now, I have to be my own producer. I have to constantly check different things. There's like a checklist of multiple items I have to constantly run through. And it's the same with editing and other things. I don't have that at that other job. Let's see. So, Isaac, 2026 is shaping up to be a loaded year at the top. 2019 vibes. I am going to take off my glasses for this one. Wow. 2026 is shaping up to be a loaded year at the top. 2019 vibes. That's what Isaac says. Thank you for the $5 super chat, Isaac. I'm taking off my glasses for more of a dramatic effect because I think it's funny. Maybe it's not to you. But I also want to do that to kind of address the seriousness to your statement. I think relative to college football's new era, it will have 2019 vibes. Relative to the era. I think that it will be stronger than 2025 and stronger than 2024. But I also want to slap a caution sticker on that, just and say that because of the portal and because of NIL and because of the new roster limits, it will probably be Walmart 2019. It will not, I don't think it'll be close to 2019 in terms of caliber of teams. Now, Ohio State should return a lot. Oregon, I think definitely because they're the youngest team out of the top 5 recruiting teams, they'll definitely return a lot. Texas should return a lot. Georgia should return a lot. Alabama should return a good chunk. The SEC schools won't return as much as the Big Ten schools. Just based on history, the fact Ohio State's proven before they can bring back a lot of their NFL players. Texas and Georgia could have done that entering this year, but they didn't. Most of the Ohio State players who went to the draft didn't even have any more eligibility, while the Texas and Georgia ones, and in some cases the Oregon ones, did. But mostly Texas and Georgia. For Oregon and Ohio State, a lot of their draft players who left genuinely didn't have any more eligibility in some situations. And others, for Oregon especially, they did. But all that being said, like 2019 Ohio State, for example, having Justin Fields, having the offensive line they did, the defense under Jeff Hafley, the fact that, they had 2 All-American corners, both viewed as elite, the fact they had Chase Young and then other great players backing him up, and the fact that, Brian Hartline was in year 2, but they still had a lot of good receivers from the Meyer era that he developed, and Chris Olave was good, and they had, I think, decent tight end play that year. And then they had J.K. Dobbins, who was a 2,000-yard rusher. You don't see that stuff anymore, and there's a reason that you don't, because since you no longer have that monopoly on your own players that you get out of high school most years, it is harder to develop players, and you have to be more tactical with your roster. You don't have the same amount of roster spots that you used to. You don't. You have more scholarships, but fewer roster spots. And it's harder to collect talent exclusively at the top, because instead of having Georgia, Ohio State, and then Alabama's the 1A recruiting program, so Alabama almost always got the number 1 class, have Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia, Texas, Oregon. Miami is getting to a point where I will tell you, if Miami wins a playoff game or wins the ACC, or if they just continue to linearly get better every year like they have under Cristobal, they're going to be that 6th team with the money they have. And then there are other teams like LSU, where if they get back, they could compete at the top. USC right now has the number 1 class, and based on how large it will be and how their average rank per recruit's high, they'll probably finish with the number 1 class, or at least very close to it. So you have more people competing for top-level recruits, and that kind of evens the playing field at the top. On top of that, with the portal and how you have more roster turnover every year and less returning production, What that means is there's less to build on for the average college football team every year. On top of that as well, coaching overall in college football, I think, has declined a little bit. There's been a coaching brain drain. Think of Nick Saban and Jim Harbaugh leaving college after 2023. That was a big coaching brain drain right there. And then a half decade before that, you had Urban Meyer. And then a year after Urban Meyer, you had Chris Peterson. A lot of the awesome coaches, and there will be another generation of them, like Lanning and Day, are pretty young. And I would say Sark has a lot of youth to him. Kirby could have 20 more years of coaching within him. So there's a lot of guys who were just high-level coordinators coming out of their most recent job, and this is their first head coaching job in terms of consecutive jobs. Obviously, Sark was a head coach before his time as the OC at Alabama, but he went from being an OC, high-level OC, to being a head coach, and he's succeeding. Same thing with Day. And then with Lanning and Smart, went from being a high-level DC to being a head coach, and they're succeeding. I think those and some others are the next future breed of great head coaches, but it will take time for that to happen. And including the portal and NIL and the wild, wild west with that, well, I think 2026 will be better than 24 and 25. I don't quite think it will be like 19. I think 19 was an insane year at the top, where you had 3 teams that could be considered GOAT talent level teams, and LSU is certainly a greatest of all time contender. I think 2019 Ohio State would beat every national champion since 2020 Alabama, for example. They wouldn't beat 2020 Alabama, but 2021 Georgia and on, they would beat all those teams, and some of them by double digits. When you look at this season, I think the same will apply. When I look at 2026, despite what everyone returns, I have to factor in that there will probably be some portal losses. There will be some smaller rosters. And I think that on top of that, along with recruiting being more leveled at the top, I think that, for example, 2019 Ohio State would probably plaster 2026 Ohio State. Even though I think 2026 Ohio State's going to be really good, and right now they'd be my natty favorite. They would be my pick to win it all in 2026. It'd be the same with Oregon. It'd be the same with Texas. Probably same with Georgia and Alabama. I think that 19 LSU would handily beat all those teams, just from a way too early projection standpoint. I think 19 Clemson would beat all those teams, and 19 Ohio State would beat all those teams. So, in a sense, yes, 2019 vibes, feelings, I get it. It will be a much stronger year than 24 and a stronger year than 25. I think for sure. But it'll probably be closer in strength to, let's say, 2023 or 2017, let's say, than 2019. 2019 was one of the strongest years in the 21st century, quite honestly. I mean, Michigan that year, who went 9-4 and at times looked bad, finished power rated ahead of playoff Oklahoma in FPI. So 19 was pretty powerful. I mean, you had Wisconsin and Penn State in the top 10. You had Oregon, who I think finished top 5 in FPI, but then had a loss to a young Jaden Daniels, who was obviously good. So I'm not dismissing your point. I think it's actually a great one. It's a fantastic, it's a fantastic analytical point. I'm very excited for 2026. I think 2026 will be a more exciting year than this year, because it'll be even more years removed from the Saban dynasty. And I think that with conference realignment, the tough schedules, NIL, and the portal even being enforced more, and then the playoff changes, and we will have seen 2 years of an expanded playoff from 4 teams, I think 2026 is going to be even more exciting than 2025. So I'm looking forward to that year. I'm already planning some things for that year. I'm actually going to make a video, should hit the notification bell to get that video, within the preseason that gives a way too early prediction for 2026 before the 2025 year even kicks off, because I think it's a fun idea. But 2019 was strong, and it was clear by middle of the year that it was going to be Alabama, LSU, Ohio State, and Clemson, who were the only teams capable of winning it all. Not because there weren't other elite teams, but because those 4 teams were looking like GOAT caliber teams. I think that 2019 Oregon, and even to a certain degree, a team like 2019 Wisconsin or 19 Georgia could have competed for a playoff win, and 19 Georgia certainly could have been the Natty favorite in another year besides 2019, but they were the 5th best team that year. Taking a pause to think, because I don't always like to blurt out my thoughts. Observing 2026 and what I think college football looks like now moving forward, I think the further you get into this, even if some years are stronger than 2024 and 2025, I think the average national champion from here on out will be weaker than 2024 Ohio State. On average. And I don't think 2024 Ohio State was a strong national champion. Cite the 2 losses. The average national champion will be weaker than 2023 Michigan and any of the Georgia teams who came before them. Maybe I'm wrong there, but those teams did a really good job retaining their top players, and most of them came from high school. And the further you get from, again, the 2021 recruiting class was recruited in the mostly pre-NIL era. Now that you have high schoolers who've grown up in the NIL era, they're going to treat this a little bit differently. So, those are just my thoughts there. 2019 will be a strong year, but will it field 3 potentially greatest of all time teams? I don't think so. Texas played LSU 19 more competitively than any other team. Yup, but they choked in classic Tom Herman fashion. If only they kicked those 2 field goals close to the goal line, that may have been enough to put them in a position to win. How hilarious would that be? And they still would have made the playoffs if they lost that game. Okay. If any of you have any other super chats, we'll answer them. So please send those in. Till then, I'll be just reviewing different things. Quinn was not offered $8 million, and Texas does not have a $40 million roster. These stories were addressed by Sark and Chris Del Conte. Yeah, I will say I think Texas is spending more than anyone was last year due to roster inflation, but $40 million? I don't know. I could see it happening. The way they paid those D tackles, pretty impressive. But anyway, even if Texas is spending that money, it doesn't discredit them. They're just taking advantage of their circumstances. I wasn't asking for the details. Okay, I'm sorry there. I watched that game a few weeks back, and I was watching and thinking to myself, why are they going for it on 4th and goal? Why are they doing that? Like, they don't yet know that Joe Burrow is going to win the Heisman, for crying out loud. You're from the 3 and you have Sam freaking Ellinger. You don't have Vince Young. Just kick the field goals. But it's Tom Herman, and Tom Herman, as a Texas buddy of mine has described, was an arrogant a-hole. So, in that regard, it makes sense. Abdul, we were robbed out of that OSU versus LSU 2019 Natty. And FPI would actually say Ohio State would have won that game. But I think LSU would have. And it would have been a better Natty game. It would have. I think Ohio State would have played LSU more competitively. But there's also a chance they wouldn't have, because Swinney in 19 was way better than Day in 19 as a head coach. And I can just imagine maybe Day making some of the same mistakes he did in that semifinal against LSU. And then because LSU has the current number 1, number 2 wide receivers in the NFL, it just, not even close. Will any national champion be as strong as 2024 Ohio State during the playoffs? LSU was stronger. LSU in 19 had a more impressive playoff showing than Ohio State did. They didn't beat the same amount of top teams, but also I would say 19 Clemson probably blows anyone in the 2024 field out, except for Ohio State. Ohio State would probably compete with them, but also Clemson's defense versus that O-line would just be, they'd be unwatchable. Absolutely unwatchable. The only thing that'd give Ohio State hope in that game against Clemson would be their defense. I'd say the same thing about Michigan too. 19 Clemson's beating 23 Michigan. It's the same thing with 19 Ohio State, and the 19 LSU isn't even a question. 19 LSU would plaster any national champion since after 2020 Bama. They'd plaster them. It wouldn't even be close. It would be a blowout. You think that you think that Michigan's 23 offense is scoring a lot on that LSU defense, who had all Americans, and you think that Ohio State's corners with Burke and Igbinosun are covering Jamar Chase? It wouldn't even be a game by half. It would be over. We'd all know who the winner would be. So like that is how much weaker the top teams in football have gotten. And yeah, like 19 Ohio State's one of the best teams, if not the best team of all time, who didn't even play it. It's the best team all time that never played in a title game. That's 19 Ohio State. And they're one of the best teams who didn't win a national championship, like up there with 05 USC, for example. It would have been better than Clemson. I think that. And I already answered that. Oh no, Chris, your super chat didn't go through. And 19 Ohio State beats 23 Michigan. It's not even close. It's not even close because 19 Ohio State had a mobile QB, and that plus a great O-line and a great passing attack would give that Michigan defense issues. I mean, it's just talent alone, 19 Ohio State beats 23 Michigan. But then the gap between, let's say, 19 Ohio State and 24 Ohio State is wide, like multiple touchdowns wide. I know it's Monday morning, BS, but had that Ohio State score right before halftime not happen, I think Texas probably pulls out the win. I'd agree with that. I would agree with that. Texas did a better job of creating sustainable drives than Ohio State did in that game, which is why I'm higher on Texas entering this year than Ohio State, because Texas, every player Texas returns is essentially a great college football player or better, minus maybe Ethan Burke, who's just good. And they upgraded at more positions through the portal than Ohio State did. Every Ohio State player who returns is not a good college football player. Smith and Downs are the best in America, so they have a higher ceiling when it comes to their individual returning starters than Texas does. But Ohio State also returns Tegra Shabola, who probably would have been benched on Michigan's interior offensive line last year, and that was not a good interior O-line from Michigan. You also have the other you also have like Carson Hinsman, who has a PFF grade in the 50s. Igbinosun was a worse player on defense than anyone Ohio State has returning, for example. Styles isn't as good as Anthony Hill Jr. Like Texas doesn't have the two best players in America like Ohio State does, but they have a more balanced roster. I mean, I would say the only team that has a more balanced roster than Texas right now is Penn State and maybe Clemson, and that's mostly because they're old. Well, that sucks, Chris, that happened. That sucks. Gosh. Maybe I didn't see it. Maybe you did it on another YouTube video. I don't know. CK Cash 26, $5 super chat. Thank you very much. He says, "Go Big Red." Go Big Red to you too. We're going to be talking about Nebraska soon. And the minute Corn Crazed is able, like once he's settled in moving, the minute he can come on the channel, I'm getting him on the channel, or I want to go on his channel. Go Big Red. Thank you for that $5 super chat. And by the way, for Nebraska, One little tidbit before I get off. I think that Nebraska is a year away from being a playoff contender, but having Holgorsen for a full year is huge. It's huge. I think that you're going to see Raiola look like one of the best QBs in the nation this year, or at least one of the better QBs, maybe not one of the best. And then Juck on Bucks is here. This is funny because it's true. If oh, holy cow, where did that come from? I know it's Monday morning QB, but had Ohio State not ended 3 of its first half drives with penalties, they would have made Texas quit by half. Yeah, man, that was bad. Ohio State had all the momentum, and this is what I talk about. Like, hypotheticals are fun. They're fun, but they're not the game. Like, Ohio State coached circles around Texas that game. They did. They absolutely coached circles around Texas. They did. I don't think anyone can question that. Like, Day, Knowles, and Kelly never had a play call that was as bad as that halfback toss at the 2-yard line. The minute the running back is running like it's a toss and Ewers is about to toss it to him, I'm thinking to myself, why would you do that? You just gained like a yard up the middle. Do it 2 more times and you'll get into the end zone. Crazy. I mean, Sark's play calling inside the goal line in that game at the end, that play call was just as bad as any of the Kelly runs up the middle for Ohio State against Michigan. It was horrible. And thank you, Juck on Bucks, by the way, for coming on. Oh gosh. Oh my gosh, this is horrible. But anyway, thank you, Juck on Bucks. He runs a great show, by the way. Juck on Bucks does. So everyone, before we end off the show today, everyone, please subscribe to his channel, hit his notification bell. I love his stuff. I just watched his episode with Dylan this morning. Wonderful episode. Wonderful episode. I watched the whole thing, all 50 minutes. It's worth it. Every bit you can get. Okay. This one's fun. That's why I was dying of laughter. Bald Father Betts, thank you for the $50 chat. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. What up, y'all? Do we think the 24 Buckeyes could beat the 24 Philadelphia Eagles? What about every NFL Hall of Famer in their prime from the NFL? Based on these Buckeye threads, I think 24 Buckeyes might be favored by about 7. Yeah, it's this is something we've talked about, and it's something that I think I've alluded to on Twitter. Actually, I posted about it, and then Twitter didn't let me send my tweet, and I didn't find out until like 2 weeks later, which was stupid. But I basically posited the question that with the amount of Buckeye people who think that this team is basically going to reload, the way that they're saying it's going to reload implies they're going to be better than last year. And I just don't think they've read in between the lines or quite connected the dots as to what they're saying will happen means. I'm actually going to make a video about this, and I think I've mentioned this before. Bald Father Betts, I'm going to make a video literally talking about, and all of you should subscribe so that you will get notified when I make this. I'm going to literally talk about a video discussing if Ohio State can be as good as 2019 LSU, because based on the way people are talking about it, it kind of feels like they believe it can happen. And there's probably a 0.5% chance it could, maybe a 1% chance it could. Probably less than that, based on how good 19 LSU was. But it's possible because they have Jeremiah Smith and because they have Caleb Downs. Like that makes it possible. And for most, it's impossible. Juck answered the question from DeMoney5675. You asked it more than once, so it's courtesy to answer. What are your thoughts on Marvin Harrison Jr. brother since Ohio State just offered him? I mean, he shares the genetics. He has to be a stud. And that's what Juck on Bucks answered. And he would know more about that than I do because he very, very closely follows Ohio State recruiting. He's a lead at it. So he would know. He says he's a stud. Basically gets my stamp of approval. Juck for president and Boldfather for vice president. Yes, why not? They would certainly know how to manage our country's financial situation than anyone else. And that isn't even full on sarcasm. That's the furthest I'll get when it comes to politics. Thank you, Chris, for the $2 super chat. I appreciate it a lot. Yeah. Okay. Well, everyone. Oh, yeah. This is Antonios Duropoulos. I hope that's how I say your name. I may have butchered it. I talk with him, by the way, a lot. So it's good to see you pop in here. Buckeyes by 40, no question about it. He also mentioned something about Notre Dame. The only thing I'll say about Notre Dame is that the Al Washington experience ain't all that good, and the Chris Ash experience probably isn't either. So that's the last I'll say. We should do a show, Juck. Sam and I closer to game time Texas versus Ohio State. Oh, yeah. I'm actually going to... I'll do that. Thank you for reminding me of that, Baldfather. He also has a pretty good channel. It's small because it's his... well, I won't bore you with details. I don't even know if he wants me to share details, but it's a smaller channel, but it offers excellent analysis for sports betting. It's the only sports betting channel I will ever tell you about with good news on the channel because I personally don't bet, at least yet. I think there's a lot of questionable behavior with betting, but Baldfather Bets has a proven system that will literally win you money if you bet right. So subscribe to his channel and hit his notification bell too if you want to get betting advice. And go to him before you go to like some stupid FanDuel person or something, because half the time they don't even know what they're talking about. And who knows, some of those sponsors for the betting sites I almost think are like double agents where they're trying to get the public to go one way to win Vegas money. Wouldn't shock me if Vegas ever did that. So the last thing I'll mention before we get off here is everyone, if you haven't already, subscribe and hit the bell. Thank you all very much for thank you all very much for coming on. And I know we have 2 Texas fans in here. So Drew DeLonghorn and Baldfather Betts. If there's any Texas people you know, like a Texas channel with a lot of subscribers that you think would love to come on here so I can talk Texas football, because I want to reach out to Texas fans more, really integrate them in the channel. Same with other fans like SEC school fans, more Big Ten fans. Let me know. Just comment it in the chat and I'll see it and take a picture of it. Or if any of you know my contacts, like Twitter, you can always message me on Twitter, or you join the Discord server and message me, or if you have my cell, you can message me. That'd be very helpful. But yeah, referencing what Baldfather Betts said about doing a show with Juck, I'll have to check in and make sure if everyone can do that. But I have enough channel connections to where I think we could get a panel going where we have like more than just 2 people talking. That'd be pretty cool. So I'll put that in the works, but I have to go eat because I'm starving. And I'll see you guys very soon. This is a very successful stream. Imagine we'll get successful videos and views off the clips. You would be great on Fanatic Perspective. Okay, I'm going to look that up. Okay, this is a very great live show, and our goal is to hit 100,000 subscribers. That's our goal. So I hope we can get there one day. See you guys soon. Peace.